Our first presentation is by Fred Bernard, who is a retired hard rock minerals exploration geologist, educated in geology at the University of California, Berkeley, and the University of Colorado at Boulder. He worked in exploration for 2 years for two mining companies, International Nickel and Anaconda Minerals, for a total of 17 years, followed by 28 years as a consulting geologist based in Golden, Colorado. His work included examination of mines and mineral prospects and developments in every Western state and in 45 foreign countries. He was also involved in organizing mining conferences for the AIME, SME in the US, and African mining conferences for the World Bank in Morocco and Burkina Faso. Fred's first MHA presentation was in Globe in 2006. Okay. And are you ready?
Hello. Yeah. Can you
Yes.
hear me fine?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. This conference has certainly showcased many interesting presentations. I hope this one will be interesting and informative as well. I'm going to switch gears a little bit out of Nevada and talk about a major mine in the U.S. that many MHA members have frankly probably never heard of. Next slide. Next. Yeah. This is the Eagle Mountain Iron Mine in the Colorado Desert, which is the low desert south of the Mojave Desert in southeastern California. And this story isn't about prospectors and jackasses. This story does include a ghost town, but it's totally unlike the ghost towns we've been hearing about in Nevada this week. And it's a story that begins with the Pearl Harbor attack in 1941 and ends in 1983, only 42 years later. I should point out that in addition to published sources, my own experiences at the Eagle Mountain Mine in the summer 1961 as a summer undergraduate hire have contributed to this report. It's hard for me to believe that that's 60 years ago this month. I'd also like to acknowledge two of the so-called Eagle Mountain refugees, Christy Moore of the Eagle Mountain High School class of 1970 and Sandra Carson of the Eagle Mountain High School class of 1982, for the real life information they imparted about growing up in the town. Next, please. Eagle Mountain, even though it's not well known because iron mining isn't sort of in the forefront of what mining history people think about these days, except in Marquette and except next year in Birmingham. But this was a significant mine and has a very interesting history for the reasons that you see on the screen. Next. There are really three parts of the story. They're almost inseparable. One, you have to understand the Kaiser steel story to know why the Eagle Mountain Mine was developed, and the town itself that formed the basis or the operating center for the mine has a very interesting story of its own. Next. You can pretty much read this for yourself. Before 1942, there were a number of small remelt operations in California and elsewhere on the Pacific coast, but no primary producers of any size that produced iron or steel from iron ore. And again, you can see what happened right after Pearl Harbor. Government loan to Kaiser in March 1942, construction the next month, and the first pig iron pour only 8 months later in January 1943. And Eagle Mountain played a major role in the history of the Kaiser steel mill in Fontana. Next. This is the mill when it was under construction. There were 3 blast furnaces built and 7 open hearth furnaces to process pig iron to steel. The picture on the right is when things were going full blast in the late 1940s. Next. Well, to make steel, or to make, pig iron from ore, you need several ingredients. You need iron ore, firstly. That came in the first years from Iron Springs in southwestern Utah, in Iron County, Utah, near Cedar City. And also lesser amounts from the Vulcan mine, Mojave Desert, a little bit from the Iron Mountain mine, and from several other mines, as well as scrap. And that enabled the Fontana mill to get up and running starting in 1943. The other necessary ingredients to making steel include coke or coking coal, which could be coked at Fontana. They went as far afield as Utah, Colorado, and Raton Basin in New Mexico. For coking coal, there's essentially no coal in California other than the mined out fields near Mount Diablo. And some of this coal had to travel 900 to 1,000 miles by rail to get to Fontana. Limestone was fairly convenient nearby. Dolomite to use as flux in the open hearth furnaces came from just south of Las Vegas, or from Northern California initially, and later from the Sloan deposit in Nevada. Next. The Fontana situation contrasts starkly with what you're going to see next year in Birmingham, which was the cast iron center of the United States for decades. At Birmingham, the iron ore, limestone, and coal were all within 25 to 50 miles of the newly founded city of Birmingham. It was founded in 1871, strictly named after the industrial city in the UK, and it turned into a major iron producing area for just about 100 years. Next. Now we're going to talk about the Eagle Mountain Mine. This wasn't just another iron mine. It was a pretty big one. Even though it lasted only for 35 years of production, it produced more iron ore than the entire state of Utah in its history, or Missouri in its history. It was still a fraction of what was produced in Birmingham, and a tiny fraction, of course, of the Lake Superior ores. Next. I won't say a whole lot about the geology, but this is a contact deposit formed by intrusion of Mesozoic intrusives into probably Paleozoic or possibly Precambrian metamorphosed sedimentary rocks, including dolomites and quartzites. In detail, there were two ore bands on both sides of a big antiform. And in detail, it's very complicated, as you can see by this geologic map showing a small fraction of one of the ore trends with along the sides of the antiform. Next. The minerals of interest in most iron deposits are magnetite and hematite. There is some pyrite at Eagle Mountain. It was a part of the hydrothermal phase that replaced some of the magnetite. And the pyrite, along with the silicates and other minerals, of course, are undesirable in the ore. You don't want it. So it had to be removed in the beneficiation plant. There was also some gypsum from oxidation of the pyrite at shallow levels. Next, please. Well, this is an area with zero infrastructure. So the first small shipments of ore, just a few tens of thousands of tons, probably less than 50,000, was shipped by truck to the rail heading about 50 miles away. 4 ballasted ships during the exploration and development period, and some shipments for smelting trials at Fontana. They had to complete a 52-mile railroad before they could start any significant mining, which happened in August 1948, and the trains started running in October. Next, please. Here's this black line is the rail line, which was a completely virgin railroad, followed just dirt roads across country and connected with the Southern Pacific Main Line at the edge of the Salton Sea, which is just barely visible in the lower left-hand corner. So it was about 140-something, 150 miles to the steel mill in Fontana, of which 52 miles was new standard gauge. Next. These are some pictures taken right at the beginning of mining in 1948. That little truck there that looks like a toy by today's standards is probably war surplus truck. And notice that the shovel doesn't have any electrical cable going to it. It's probably diesel powered cable thing, the kind of thing you find in museums today, but it was important then. Next. Mining was sort of typical, a drill blast load. The ore bodies varied a lot in thickness and in attitude, but didn't create any huge problems. In the initial years, the standard bench height was 30 feet. This varied a little bit depending on the topography and the width and so forth. Next. It was very important to beneficiate the ore, as is typical in iron mines. The mine grades were, averaging only about 50%. And so there was, at the Eagle Mountain processing plant, beneficiation plant, or Bene plant as they called it, you had 3 stages of crushing, screening, heavy media cycloning, magnetic separation to make a magnetite concentrate as well, and blending stockpiles to maintain a shipping content of usually over 60%. That varied depending on where the ore was going, because there were export shipments as well. The pelletizing plant opened in 1965 and was the largest in the world at the time it was built. Next. Production ramped up quickly and eventually reached 9 million tons per year, with a total of 120 million tons mined and more than 80 million tons shipped to Fontana, and some to exports. The employment peaked in the 60s and 70s at about 1,500 on site. Next. This aerial view was taken just about the time of the startup. You can see at the right-hand side, there's the beginnings of the East Pit. The processing plant is at about the center. There's not much there. I think probably they were just sieving and direct shipping for the first few months. The town site is at the lower part, and it's a very small town at this stage. Offices and so forth in the middle of the railroad loop. Next. This is later when the plant was essentially in almost its final form. This picture was taken before the pelletizing plant went in, but pretty much everything else is there. And you can see now they've extended mining along the ore trend westward into the central pit area. Next. These are a few pictures I took in 1961. 105-ton haul trucks replacing the little World War II toys. And part of the crew at the assay lab. The assay lab was right next to the beneficiation plant, so they could have not real time, but next day assaying. Was all done wet by titration to control the iron grade, as well as keep the sulfur under control and make sure there were no blips in the phosphorus. The lower picture shows a summer hire helping survey the site for the future high school, which opened in 1962 and stayed open until 1983. Now we're going to talk about, next. So here's the whole thing, a little more distant view. You see the town site is much larger now. The pit has extended into the mountains. Next. Now I'm going to talk about the town of Eagle Mountain, which is a modern ghost town. It was started as a tent camp in 1946. Eventually, as you can read here, had 400 residences and a population of about 4,000. For those that didn't live in a home, there was a trailer park, there were dormitories for single people, and believe it or not, there were people who commuted
It's
from
still
work
a weak
daily.
connection, but it's a connection.
Okay, can you hear me okay?
We got you, Fred.
Yeah. Okay. Some workers commuted 65 miles each way from Indio because they preferred to live there. There were schools and everything else, as you can see. The entire town was owned by Kaiser Steel. There was no private property, and it was never incorporated. The elevation at only 1,300 feet meant that it was very hot and as well as being dry. Next. But it was a little suburban town set out in the desert. Again, 400 homes, 1,500 people. You can see the swamp coolers on the sides of these houses. They work just great in the dry climate. There's a family having some kind of a get-together on their lawn with lots of shrubs, and it was a very pleasant place, actually. Below you see the Eagle Mountain High School marching band, and you see the girls at the swimming pool, showing that youth is wonderful. Too bad that it's wasted on young people, isn't it? Next. You can read this essay, which is written by Christy Moore, who's a graduate of the 1970 high school class and is a member of the Facebook group, the Eagle Mountain Refugees. They're called that refugees because they can't return to the town anymore, their hometown. I talked to one girl, whose grandfather started working there in 1946. Her mother was born while he worked there, and she was born while her parents worked there. And she graduated from high school in 1982. And actually, that woman became a mining geologist and is working in the mining industry today. Next. Well, all good things have to come to an end, and Eagle Mountain was no exception. When the Kaiser work shut down, the mine lost its main customer, although there were a lot of export shipments to Japan by that time and Korea. And the town was essentially shut down in 1983. A skeleton crew maintained shipping of stockpiled ore to 86. And after the last train departed, the track was torn up. Next. This is what Eagle Mountain looks like today. All these homes are just empty shells. There are actually 2 occupied homes that are kept supplied with utilities for security staff. And one of the schools is still in operation. The other 2 schools have been dismantled. There were 19 students in the school this past spring. Of course, it's summer break now. And there are students from tiny settlements in the region, including pumping stations on the Colorado River Aqueduct and a couple of trailer parks out in various parts of the desert. High school students that live there, of which there are 2 or 3, commute 70 miles each way to La Quinta High School near Indio. Next. Well, the legacy you can see here was a significant one. It aided in not in the World War II, but it definitely in the Korean and Vietnam Wars. And the town now serves as a repository of memories for the 1,700 plus Eagle Mountain refugees, and also for us mining historians. Next. Thank you. That's all.